Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of FCA's Talk at 5 o'clock. And today I have a very special guest. I don't know from where to start, Jamie. This person is the Public Sector CEO of the Year. He has multiple awards and recognitions. CIO of 100 award winner, near 100 IT leader to follow in 2025 and beyond. And if he is not one of the most interesting men in the world, then I don't know who else is. Jamie, with all greatest pleasure, I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast today. And today we'll have a very interesting but definitely not boring conversation. I hope you'll help me out here. We're going to talk about cyber, we're going to talk about AI, and we're going to talk about what the heck is going on in the federal space and AI, right?
That's right. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. It's going to be fantastic, interesting, and I hope very thought-provoking.
Thought-provoking, absolutely. And I think it's the key element, and let's start from here. I know there's a lot of controversy, conversations happening in a federal space. What are we doing? What we're not? Are we allowing AI into the federal space? Are we not? Are we crawling, running, flying? What's your take on this?
Well, the maturity in the AI space with the federal government is very immature. We're just starting out. But my recommendation and my call to action is to start doing and stop talking. My goodness, we talk so much. We need to start doing and actually have some measurable results. I always say better, cheaper, and faster. And you can have metrics in all of those areas. So often the federal government thinks about better, 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 but we also have cheaper and faster. So if you can do the same thing cheaper and faster, it is a great success. So use those measures appropriately. AI might not do things better, but it definitely can do things cheaper and faster. One of the innovative cliches that I have is anything from a research or consultative perspective, if AI touches it, the value of that service will now go to around zero because everyone is gaining access through generative AI tool sets to such a large set of data. These data sets, these content providers are really opening up and all the insights are coming out. So if you have a consultative or an advisorial role, you're advising folks, you really need to think about how you can help guide rather than provide that content any longer, because it's right there. It's right there at your doorstep. Not a plug for an old colleague of mine, but Jerry Ma is working at Perplexity. And if you have not looked at Perplexity as one of your tool sets, you really should, because it is a great competitor to all the big names. And so there's many ways to tackle a problem. Just go out there and do it. Do it.
I think you're bringing the very good point, Jamie, that it's all about fear, concerns, reservations, and talking, and little action is being taking place. And that comes out of the former, CIO of the Patent and Trademark Office. So you know exactly what the challenges the federal space has been facing, how they're sandbagging, and kind of going back and forth, should we not? Tell us a little bit more about your days as the CAO of the Patent and Trademark Office. Back in the day, I believe that there was just an early signs of AI. How does the federal space adapt, respond when the early signs of AI occurred?
Well, those are great questions because it goes to the maturity of things. And in the beginning, about 4 years ago, we started doing AI, which was machine learning and neural network feedback loops, right? It was not this big generative AI push. There's a lot of artificial intelligence that is not part of this new way of doing business. So we can't forget the old school AI because it really is industrialized. Right now, we're looking at generative AI and we're trying to make it industry proof or at least industry based. And it's not to that level yet. So What do we do and why is there fear? Well, no one should like bet the farm, as they say, or on something that is unproven. Whenever we're accepting or adopting emerging technologies, I usually use a three-step process. The first step is to prove the business case. In other words, ensure you know what the costs and benefits are, they're measured, and they're performed for you. In other words, you have the results in front of you. And that provides the technical capability as well as the business value. Number two is to ensure that you can scale that across whatever domain you need to. Sometimes you don't need to spread it across the enterprise. Other times you do. Whatever scaling is required, you need to ensure that you do the research for you to reveal and then respond to problems before they happen during deployment. Because if there's anything that will stop an emerging technology project, it is running into those barriers and those walls of technology. Well, I didn't take this into account. We don't have enough size. We don't have enough scope. There's not enough bandwidth or processing speed. And then finally, step three of my emerging technology process is to ensure that you have an executive champion who will pay for it in operations and then help with the natural resistance of change of people to adopting that model. You have to have your disciples. They have to have the small wins. And as you get momentum, you build it throughout the organization until you get final success. Those are the three steps, and that's what you need to do in order to have a successful deployment of emerging technology.
I think when you talk about it, what comes to mind is to probably some of our listeners, there are some federal agencies, so called champions of AI transformation. And I really want you to speak directly to them because if I would, you and I will put ourselves for a second in their shoes. They have a lot at stake and a lot to risk on. Imagine that you're taking a full responsibility in adopting something in a federal environment that you don't quite fully understand and it's okay, right? I mean, no one really tries to be an expert in AI or really understand all concepts of it. So what would you say? Because I have a theory that the holdback is driven by the uncertainty and lack of maybe confidence, if I can say that, to be the step forward, to become this advocate, to become the pioneer, to allow to launch the early pilots.
Totally agree with you in the fact that the fear is the driving factor because you don't know. But why don't you know? Because you haven't immersed yourself in it. So you need to roll up your sleeves and fail fast because you will fail. The thing to realize is you don't want to fail big. So if you get something going and you just do it half-heartedly instead of just throwing in and doing all of it, you can't fail fast. What will happen is you'll try to overcome these gaps that might not be overcomable. And so you really need to fail fast in the beginning. And that's the thing. So what you fail fast? Because then you can readjust and then get those small wins I talk about to build on. The whole thing about introducing something is to ensure that it not only operates, but that it's a secure and you're not going to lose data or information. That's why I came to the private sector, and I'm now with a firm called USAI. And it combines cyber and artificial intelligence to ensure that whatever goes in does not come out. And so, in that regard, one of the best recommendations I can have is whenever you're designing your new emerging technology, ensure that the secure access controls are actually in place and measured so that whatever goes in never comes out.
And I love you mentioned you shifted from the public sector into private sector. And I know that the company you work for right now, it called US AI. Did you pay $1 billion for a domain? I mean, it's like, looks like a very expensive one.
It's great because it's been around now for over 7 years. And yet, yes, the US government just put out usai.gov. So we are not associated with that other than we want to promote USAI as much as we can. So thank you, US government.
It's a free advertising for the sake of it, right?
Yes, and there's a lot of great things that are coming from artificial intelligence in the US. I mean, just look at all of the large companies who are trying to promote their products on this new site, usai.gov. And it might be a marketing cliche, or it might be, just someone getting you to try it out. But that's what the point is. We should be trying these things out as a federal government. We should be immersed in all of the new technologies to see if there's better, cheaper, and faster ways to get things done. We should not accept the status quo. What we need to do is challenge that. I always said at the USPTO, there's three things I want folks to do: A, B, C. And what are those things? A is acting now. You have to act with a sense of urgency. B is be bold. Do something that's big. Who cares if you took out the trash or you're doing these trivial clerical things? Do something that's bold and that's going to make a difference. And finally, C is to create new. You can use all of the old adages and all of the old lessons learned and make something brand new, make something at your own. So ABC, act now, be bold, and create new.
Love it. Absolutely love it. My father once told me that the greatest accomplishments in life lay on the other side of our fears. And that message really was propelling power in my career journey. Whenever I felt scared, intimidated, I knew that there is a greater win on the other side. And I think with the US AI, we can safely, securely, and in controlled environment deploy small or large pilots with the mitigated risks for deployment, right? And allow federal space to experiment, to allow them to feel the joy of failure, because the only way you get curious, the only way you can evolve is by failing and trying again and understand in the process what works and what doesn't. On a personal note, can you tell us a little more about your transition phase from the public sector into the private sector? What triggered it? I feel that there's a story behind it for sure.
Well, there's always stories. There's so many. But in this case, the story is that I became of retirement age, and I was able to leave the government gracefully and just leave it to the next generation because I had been there 6.5 years. Normally, I like to leave every 3 or 4 years and then do something else. So I stayed a little longer because there were things that I truly wanted to get done. Some of those accomplishments include eliminating all of the mainframe applications of old. And so now we are on a new foundation at the USPTO, and the architectures are prone now to the internet and cloud activity. And so when we move to the cloud, you have the ability now to actually scale in size. And you don't have to worry about your capital assets because it can be on an expense basis where you're leasing that equipment. And not only that, you can lease brand new equipment all the time and let the data center folks, those cloud service providers, ensure that you have the best and the most secure environments at your disposal. AI requires great processing speed and great storage, as well as great bandwidth, the three parts of any IT capacity build and consideration. So, in that regard, letting the cloud service providers provide all the new stuff for all the federal government does not need to be in charge of their own data center. Now, of course, there are some missions in the federal government that call for things to be in their own data center. I can think of intelligence and the National Security Agency and so forth. But for the most part, especially in federal civilian, what we need to do is use the benefits of that commercial activity. We have the best commerce and the best economy in the world. We need to use that to our advantage and take advantage of all the new technology that's out there. And right now, we're preventing ourselves from doing that. We're shooting ourselves in the foot because before we even bring things in, we have to say, oh, well, you need to do this and you need to have this compliance checklist and everything else. We need to streamline that so they can prove the functionality of these new emerging technologies. And then we can do the cyber, right? You design it with the fact that it will be in a secure environment. So let's prove out the functionality in that business case. That's step one. And then when you're doing the scale, ensure all the control access is taken care of. And you've thought of that prior to moving into the next step, which is scaling throughout the enterprise. So secure by design is a real deal. We need to ensure that people are always thinking of that once they prove out that they actually have something that people want.
I love it. We monitor the dynamics in the federal market acquisition very closely. We also bid on some RFIs and RFPs. And I see a lot of actually USPTO has recently released one of the AI enablement RFI. And RFI are literally flooded SAM.gov and all other, even the federal and the local state, and they're asking for information. However, it takes from RFI to RFP, it usually takes anywhere from 8 to 12 months to actually come up with something that they want. And I think in an AI language or in AI years, that means a lightning years apart. If you request an RFI, let's say a year ago, requested an RFI a year ago, you got a response based on the data available a year ago. Today, it can be, probably is completely irrelevant. So, how can the federal space or agencies can accelerate their process? Because I understand where they're coming from, right? When you talk about RFIs, they're trying to learn what they don't know. They try to gather the information to know what to ask. So how can the industry can support them in terms of shrinking the timeline from RFIs to RFP, or maybe deploying some efficient pilots projects where they can quickly decide, get a proof of concept, and get the ball rolling?
Well, I do think that's the whole effort underway at GSA. And I'm very encouraged by the new FAR and how they're trying to ensure that the policies actually do what you're talking about, make things quicker, because 6 to 8 months is no longer acceptable. A 3 month time frame is okay. In fact, that's what the commercial world operates on. You do things in 30, 60, and 90-day increments. So within that first 30 days, you might get all of the responses. In the next 30 days, before 60 is over, you can do the evaluation. And in the final 30 days, the 90-day mark, you can actually evaluate and award. So in 30, 60, and 90-day increments, that's what the pace of change needs to be. No longer can we afford to have all these things hung up in protest. We have to encourage people to stop trying to take advantage of the government, to stop doing these silly protests that have nothing to do other than increase the cash flow of the current incumbent. We have to ensure that people are doing the right thing. And that means profiting from it reasonably, as well as ensuring that the delivery is done for the government and the government gets what it needs. We need to focus down on our missions and not do so many other ancillary duties. As an example, right? If the PTO is charged with awarding patents and registering trademarks, there's no need that they have to do outreach to small businesses because that's the mission of the Small Business Administration. So we need to ensure that we're focusing on our missions and not doing other things that other government agencies do. If we focus on delivery and we focus on the citizen and the services provided, I think we'll have a great 30, 60, 90-day paradigm that we can actually execute against.
That would be a dream come true, literally. And I'm hopeful that we're really marching towards this way. You've mentioned the changes, the drastic changes in FAR. I think there's some pros and cons in the change in new updated FAR that actually will make things work a little faster, hopefully a lot faster than it used to be, but it also leveling out the play field for all of the contractors in place and industries in place. I've heard that they can eliminate or substantially reduce the leverage that used to be given to the small businesses set aside or set asides. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that? What are your personal opinions? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Because the small guys will have to compete against the big guys all in the same playing field.
Well, yeah, well, you're asking me for my personal opinion. I'm very happy to give it. I believe that I believe that innovation and creativity truly occur in the small business vein. Most of the time when you aggregate money into large Fortune 500s or large corporations, what happens is innovation is sort of stifled because you have to pass all these prior gates and people are like, no, no. Small businesses have the ability to create and innovate on the fly. They don't have to ask permission. They need to ask forgiveness after something already works. Now, of course, that also means that the risk is higher. If you go into the government, many government organizations are risk averse. And why is that? Because the statutes, the laws, the regulations prevent them from taking undue risk. The question becomes, how do we create reasonable risk? And I'll tell you how we can do it through the new FAR regulations or maybe just through a personnel change. And how is that? The people that control the terms and conditions of contracts are our contracting officers. They're the ones who hold the warrant that actually obligates the government to pay or to deny payment for services rendered. That's where the rubber meets the road. Currently, our contracting officers are not held accountable for the results of that contract. They're only held accountable for mitigating the exposure and risks. Once they sign the contract, they turn it over to operations and they let them run. And so your SESs and your GS-15s, they have the responsibility to ensure delivery and so forth. However, what happens when the CO doesn't care because he doesn't care if it delivers or not? That's part of the contractor, part of operations. What if in the performance appraisal of the CO actually has skin in the game and they actually have to ensure that the results are delivered? Well, all of a sudden now this CO cares about the performance of the contract on a regular basis. The reason that's not in there now is because they don't want a conflict of interest. They don't want to have the fox watching the hen house. But at the same time, that's the whole thing about being reasonable. Right now, it appears that we're on the other side of reasonability, where everything is so far from the truth that the CO can't even see what the performance results are. We need to bring it back to a balanced medium where we actually have some skin in the game for the CO. What do you think about that?
You know what? I think you bring in a very valuable point. It's not just the regulational changes that has to take place. There's cultural shifts must take place as well. The mentality of operations in minds and hearts of people who run the operations day to day and been running these for years and years needs to really change drastically in order to accomplish the faster turnaround, in order to have a stake in a game and feel the responsibility and accountability for the project success or failure, hopefully not failure, right? And I love to say that in AI era, we all are in this together. It's not us versus them. It's my service versus yours. Who is better? We all learn, we all evolve, and all find ways how to bring the greatest technology that is available since probably invention of cars into accelerator of our productivity. Can you talk a little bit more about cultural transformation and how do you see that should be happening? And is it happening right now or not?
So I'll use the words, I didn't coin this phrase and I forget who did, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. It doesn't matter. You can have the greatest strategic objectives and vision statements, everything else. If your culture does not align to that vision statement, you won't get it done. And the culture currently in the government is one, as I said, of less risk. We need to deliver on this in the most efficient way possible. And I don't want to say cheapest, right? The most efficient way, because we don't want to waste the taxpayers' money. And so, in that regard, we're trying to do things on the cheap. And that's not the greatest idea all the time. Sometimes, and there's the reasonable part of things, right? That's why I believe that culture, the personnel inside needs to change. You look at what the current administration is doing, changing out the people and having different perspectives that we've never had before. This is a great relook at how you can manage and administer the federal government. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity I think we should all take advantage of. So, what are we going to do in changing that culture? Well, hopefully, these people that have been brought in from the commercial world can actually see that the discipline of the government and the compliance and the less risk and the risk averse part of statutory regulations and so forth, they can finally see, oh, why doesn't the government operate quicker? Well, because there's all these laws in place. All right, so now what do? You have to balance, and that's the reasonableness. You have to balance things getting done versus balance getting the regulations correctly. Because if you have all these rules and regulations, it's very difficult. Even just checking them all off to make sure you're not violating them takes time and effort, and it costs more. That's why when you let a contract, it's almost 30% cheaper for an outside contractor to do it than an inside federal employee. And why is that? Because of the great benefits the feds get, right? It's going to be 30% greater no matter what. And they take longer because they're doing all the checklists. So we're trying to encourage that commercial activity, the ability to forego some of the compliance in order to get that function out there quicker and then make sure the compliance is done once it's in operation. It's a reasonable balance, and that culture needs to change. I propose to OPN that instead of creating this career of service of 20 or 30 years, we actually think of federal personnel in three distinct areas. I think it needs to reflect more of the American economy now than the old corporate structure of the 1960s and the corporate man. In the corporate man, in a Fortune 500, from cradle to grave, it's the company man. He comes in and then 30 years later, he retires and gets the gold watch. That's not the way the world works. We need those three distinct areas of entry level, mid level, and then senior level. And each of those areas have a different recruiting and retention package. Each one of them addresses the unique and characteristics of that person. So, as an example, in the young entry level, we have a lot of people who are attracted to the mission. The DOD, the War Department actually attracts a lot of young folks for the mission of the military. Law enforcement actually has a good job of attracting that as well. Entry level in the federal and civilian side is much less because of the expertise required. So maybe instead of concentrating on entry level, we concentrate on mid-level careers. And those are people that should be coming from the commercial world into the federal government, giving that great expertise that they've developed over 10 or 15 years, and then encouraging them to leave to become a senior manager and get out in the commercial world. And conversely, then, we want people from the commercial world to come into our senior ranks in the federal government as well, to provide that perspective and have that balance. The balance of the commercial innovation and creativity and go, go, go versus the government risk averse compliance and statutory regulations. So when you have that balance, that's what America could do best. We could provide that new culture through our personnel and OPM.
Really resonates very well with me because what you're saying is that the creating this symbiosis between the public and private sector that flows the knowledge and ensures that it keeps on updated, and it gives the career progression and constant relevance. You've earned your credential, you've earned your expertise in seniority level in a federal space, and you bring that constructive knowledge and structure into the private sector, and then make valuable assets to help accelerate the growth, accelerate adoption, to be somewhat an interpreter of the federal language versus industry language. And that way accelerates the adoptions and progress of acquisitions and projects delivery, right?
That's exactly right. You said it very well. And I will say, well, What is the incentive? I'm a true capitalist. Why would an individual ever do that? Go into the government and take such a pay cut and so forth. Well, one thing we do have in the government, which is stability, is the fact that if you serve maybe 4 or 5 years, you serve one term, maybe you're able to get health care when you retire from the federal ranks. And so, as long as you have that honorable discharge from the federal civilian community or something, you can actually get a benefit when you retire. And so there's many ways you could create incentives for the individual to want to come into government besides just the fact that it's a great challenge and you'll have a great scope of challenge as well as the mission.
And it's the different stage in a career in life, right? So your transition from one phase to another, it can be challenging and can be frightening for a little bit, but it still has a rewarding because you feel the value that you bring into the market from a different perspective. Your seniority plays a different role, you build the different bridges, you help open doors, and that continuously flows the cycle. But I think also when we come back to AI adoption and AI enablement in a federal space and industry collaborations, when it comes down to actual individual use of it, right? And the adoption of the technology by the individual people, how comfortable they are with using AI. And they say that, oh, those youngsters, kids, they're all kind of vibe coding and all AI gurus, and it's never possible to learn. Can you tell from your personal experience, what was your earliest experience with AI and how you tame it for your own self in your personal life?
Well, you're going back 40 years now. That's really bad. In the let's see. So I'm actually a computer scientist by academics. And so actually in the 90s, I was programming in Lisp, LISP. Now, do you remember the old fuzzy logic? I don't know. You might not have even been born. Sorry.
I'm look younger than I am.
Okay. So fuzzy logic was the ability to create heuristics so that you could make decisions and actually execute against them. And that's now built into most chips because it's just, it's assumed. You look at NVIDIA and why it's so great. It's because 10 years ago, they actually coded the instructions, the basic instructions of the operating system to be much quicker because they needed gaming and so forth. You needed to have that quickness in order to create the simulations that were actually viable. So, how did I overcome it? I just immersed myself in it. You got to sink or swim, baby. And that's the thing. If you don't swim, you're going to drown. So, you don't have to jump off into the deep end. Just get into the shallow end, dip your toes in a little. And how do you do that? Well, you use some of these generative AI packages. And how I did it specifically with generative AI, probably about 2.5 years ago, was I couldn't believe all the hype. And so I said, okay, build me a grocery list so that I can eat less carbs and work out really well. And this is my routine. And tell me what I need to do on exercises and so forth. And it really did produce a great list that I'm still using today.
This is a great example. And the point is, the first point that I really want to highlight is that AI hasn't happened 2 or 3 years ago. It's been around for several decades. The fact that it existed in a medical field, in a data analytics for years, it became this hype when it became available for public and a generative AI or image generation thing that it kind of exploded as the hype. However, the technology exists, it evolved in the last decade drastically, but it's been from the 50s, the earliest science, even the conversational intelligence already existed for more than 2 decades. So everybody who feels that it's a new thing that you cannot learn, it's not simply not true. First of all, it will help you to teach it yourself. You only have to do is ask, right? And then second is that again, immersing yourself, there's abundance of the free resources. And You don't have to be a subject matter expert in AI. You don't have to write code. You don't have to program it. You need to have a general understanding of how it works to make sure that you stay relevant and understand the subject, and don't afraid to ask questions, right? It's not going to bite you. It's not going to kill you. So tell us a little more, like for the federal agency. And I've actually had these questions coming into my feed quite often from folks in a federal space as well. Where do we see and where do we find the reliable information to just get a little more and better understanding of AI? Where do you source the information?
There's a lot of different resources, as you've stated. I do think that the major players, Google, Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI, they have a lot of offerings that you could actually reach out in the web, whatever, and you could learn their different characteristics. They have training courses. LinkedIn is a great social site for work and for careers. They have the ability to get classes on LinkedIn. You could take the same thing from many of the universities. Harvard, I know, puts out some AI modules and courses. So there's a whole way that you could look at it and just understand and learn. And then once you start getting into it, you realize how deep it really goes. And then you let your own interests direct you that way. I would say if you're going to use AI, use it in your hobby first. And once you realize how it can do, what it can do, and how it can do it, then you could bring it into your work environment. And so that's a great way to take what you've done at home and then start applying it toward your work.
Actually, my very first experiments with AI, it was planning my vacation to New York with two kids. And I asked it to plan the entire trip that I wouldn't get lost, won't get robbed or killed, kidnapped. And we all have fun with the all ages. And it did brilliantly. My son was very skeptical about this. I'm like, listen, AI planned, it knows what it's doing. So I trusted my hobby and my travel plans into AI, and it did substantially better than I would have done it by myself. I want to ask you questions. What is the most surprising thing that you have learned through working with AI over the years?
Wow. The most surprising thing is that it is not a panacea. Everybody thinks that all this stuff is going to happen, and it really isn't. I mean, there's a lot of greatness that will be coming down the pike. I think the opportunities and the challenges are great, but at the same time, it's not going to be like the sci-fi images of Skynet taking over. So, that's my biggest surprise is we're still a long way to go, in my opinion. There's a lot of people who are doom and gloomers. I'm the exact opposite. Yes, it is a double-edged sword. Just like the internet was a great tool, it can also be used for nefarious purposes. So the same thing can be true. We do need to have guardrails secure by design. We need to ensure that the guardrails for AI are put in and we don't try to put our own bias in. And it could be scientific bias as well, right? It's not just the bias that people think about, the social bias. A lot of times it's the bias, scientific bias that, we want one thing to succeed. So we'll push it that way, push it that way. We need to have some more objectivity in our results so that we let the data decide for us. And that's where I think AI holds its biggest promise is if it's data directed and data driven, the more data we provide, the better and more precise our decisions will become. So I do think that it helps us all to see things in a different light and actually expose things instead of anyone's judgment. You can actually get the data and make a determination from outside anybody else's judgment.
You're absolutely right. I got a lot of questions about the hallucinations of the models and the biases and how to mitigate them. And my instant response is to mitigate it with your common sense, right? And that's the first step, right? If you have no idea what are you asking AI to produce, there is no way you can validate whether the answer is right or wrong. And it is a technology still. It's not a panacea. It doesn't have all the answers to the world. It's still created by humans based on the data that is produced by humans, and by no means it's perfect. So, to your point, the biases and hallucinations of the models can be mitigated by providing the right clean data for compute. And that's not your homegrown on the phone chat GPT, right? We're talking about enterprise grade models that are run in a private secured environments to calculate the very complex formulas at the rapid speed based on the curated, guardrailed informations at scale. And that guarantees the better results. Yes, you can do your grocery list and the preferences with your chat GPT, and that gives them errors of the green apples calorie counts versus red apples calorie count. And that's okay. And that's another risk of what are you using the AI for? It's okay to use for research, even the deep research, the publicly available services, Google Gemini, or you want to Anthropic, use Anthropic or Grok or ChatGPT. Just be mindful of this, that the sources of information that it's generated off is the public knowledge in internet or whatever is written on the fence. You wouldn't trust everything that's written on the fence. So take the results with the common sense approach, right?
I definitely agree with you. In fact, in the words of my favorite president, President Ronald Reagan, he always said, trust but verify. And so, because of that, one of the things we can't, I was reading recently that one of the largest data repositories that many of the generative AI tools use is Reddit. Okay, wait a second. If you're going to use Reddit as your source, I definitely can understand why there's false results. It's not verifiable. It's not about opinion. You need to curate some of your data in those enterprise applications. It's very interesting. I'll bring it full circle back to the USPTO. One of the things we need to do is actually find prior art. And that means things that are either the same or similar to what a person is claiming as unique and novel or new. And in searching for that prior art, it's not searching for one thing, it's searching for all those things that might aggregate to a point of obviousness, right? You can't patent something that is obvious. It has to be unique and novel. And so in searching for prior art, there's a lot of curation of data that needs to occur, ensuring that the AI does not let you go down the wrong path. And so what you were talking before about those enterprise precision algorithms, they really need to have that curated data set. And I wish more people understood that. You can take a generative AI model, LLM, a large language model, but if you supplement it with small language models that are very curated data sets, what you can do then is create the ability to weight more on your curated data than on the open and public data. So that's another technique that you can use and try to get better results.
Absolutely. And that's what we're also, I think you're referring to, the fine tuning of the model. And a lot of companies, I think, going to the extreme levels where they say, listen, we need to create our own proprietary, closed, 100% homegrown model. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the science of insanity today. With the power of, I mean, but you can, right? I mean,
Well,
but
you can
why?
do anything, right? I mean, the point about that is how do you keep it up to date?
Exactly. Right. When the big giant fundamental models allowing the very sophisticated computes that you can leverage for your organizations inside your private cloud environments with the fine tuning and enhancements with the guardrails and secure deployments on headless architectures in the secured cloud environments, even on-prem or in air-gapped environments, that guarantees the security and prevents the leakage of the data with the right data sets approach. And again, it's a mouthful of information for most of folks. But all I'm saying is that don't think that just because ChatGPT is an open resource for everybody, it means that you have no other options than to write your own private proprietary closed models all the time.
That's right. And that's why I'm here at USAI. What we do provide is the ability to put cyber and artificial intelligence together in our Foundation and Archangel products. And so I do that for a living now. It's awesome. Awesome.
So listen to whoever, to the preacher of the security compliance. Thank you, Jamie. And one last question before we wrap up. If you have an AI that can solve one biggest human problem, what that would be, in your opinion?
I do think that we're on the verge of curing cancer. So I do think that we need to focus our attention on some of those clinical trials to get us over the hump, because we've already marked the genome. We already know where the things are. And I do think we can overcome cancer.
That's wonderful. That's very powerful. I hope we're just on the tip of the iceberg to really leap into that discovery. And that's going to be fundamental, a biggest breakthrough of the humanity as a whole. Again, Jamie, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and ideas. I really think whoever is listening to this podcast, and I have a lot of followers in the federal agencies as well, would really listen in and build up a little bit more confidence with AI. And don't be afraid of failure. Be embracing curious. So replace the fear with curiosity and open mindedness and let the magic to unfold. We're all in this together. There is no you versus we all grow together. And tell us, what is the best way to reach out to you? How do you want the audience who want to kind of dig deeper with you or do business with you, how can they connect with you?
Anybody can contact me through LinkedIn. Again, Jamie Holcomb. And the thing is, my last words of advice: stop talking, start doing.
Love it. Stop talking, start doing. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Have a good one.
Pleasure as well. Thanks a lot.